can't we all just get along? Gibson with another legal dispute. This time, they are getting entangled with PRS Guitars, yes, again, and the Ted McCarty Estate. We're going to dig into exactly what's going on here. I'm going to try to remain as neutral as possible in talking about this, like I did in my Gibson DiMarzio video. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. But I am going to probably have to make my opinion known, or at least my, uneducated opinion known at the end of this video. So I'm curious to know what you think. Please leave a comment in the comment section below. And if you want to know what I think, I'll tell you at the end of the video. But let's break this down as to what exactly is going on here. Now, luckily, we do have guitar.com, who has been doing some great work to break things down for people like me and presumably like you. If you're not a lawyer, if you are, I'd love to hear from you. But they're doing a wonderful job in just making this understandable for just the lay people like us. So I'm going to link this article in the description below if you want to go check it out after the video. Now, this has, it started as one dispute and is now splintered into two. So we'll get to that second one in a second. That's where I have some opinions. The first one, though, is centered around the Theodore trademark. Now, the Theodore is this guitar that you're looking at right here. A few years ago, Gibson produced this limited run, crazy looking thing with P90s, and it was essentially a leftover drawing by Ted McCarty. Now, if you don't know who Ted McCarty is, he is responsible for almost all of the iconic Gibson designs. He's also responsible for mentoring Paul Reed Smith of Paul Reed Smith Guitars. And if you know anything about their lineup, they have the McCarty 594 to pay homage to Mr. Ted McCarty. So that's important to note because the claims coming from the Ted McCarty Estate and PRS are centered around Ted's involvement with all of these things. Now, the claim is centered around, the initial one was centered around two things. They're claiming, both PRS and the McCarty Estate, that Gibson naming this guitar the Theodore misleads guitarists into thinking that the McCarty Estate endorses this or has sanctioned the guitar, which they claim they haven't, and they don't have a right to use Ted's name. And secondly, they're claiming that it causes confusion when it comes to the McCarty model made by PRS. So now you can form your opinions on whether or not that's true, whether or not that's the case. All I will say is if you go to the Gibson website, all the materials about the Theodore guitar reference Ted McCarty and this being inspired by one of Ted's leftover designs. So they're not being shy about saying that this is related to Ted McCarty. So sounds like maybe they didn't communicate with his estate prior to doing this. I don't know. Not sure. So that is the initial claim. Now, Gibson responded to that and said that PRS and the McCarty Estate had not shown any real connection between the name Theodore and PRS or the estate or Ted McCarty himself. What is interesting to me about that is that they kind of threw some shade there, Gibson, in responding to this, I think at least. They said that Ted is not well known enough to be associated with the name Theodore on a guitar. Now, I find that to be a little bit funny because if you're in the guitar world, you know Ted McCarty, much like Leo Fender. I mean, like these are iconic names. I mean, so much of the industry wouldn't exist without these people. So, I mean, to your average person walking down the street, Ted McCarty, yeah, maybe they're not going to know who they are. But I think Gibson, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that he's not well known enough. Now, does that mean that Theodore directly relates to, I mean, this is a name. Many people have the name Theodore. Many people have the name Ted. Many people have the last name McCarty. I don't know. So what is interesting, in addition to this, though, I mentioned we had a second case that has come out of this. And seemingly, it just, I don't know, kind of out of left field, I think. Gibson responds to this, and this is all ongoing still, by the way. And it's just kind of kicking back up here in the beginning of 2024. Gibson responds to it. Not only did they respond to it, but they file a counterclaim. And this counterclaim is against the limited edition Silver Sky Nebula. That's the John Mayer guitar we all know and love. Now, you might remember the Nebula. It's a special paint scheme that only existed for a very short period of time. But Gibson is saying that their Silverburst finish could be confused with the Silver Sky Nebula. Now, you can see the Silverburst there from our friends over at Chicago Music Exchange. And that's a paint that kind of fades from silver to black as you move it around the edges. Now, the Nebula was that sort of crazy, like blue to purple. It moves. It's a really, really cool finish. Very few of those are made, 500 or 1,000, something like that. You can correct me in the comments. But Gibson is saying that the fact that they have the Silver Sky Nebula conflicts with their Silverburst, as you could find those two things confusing. Now, as you see here, guitar.com points out, it is not particularly clear as to why Gibson's cancellation claim is limited to the Silver Sky Nebula rather than just Silver Sky overall. Because are we talking the color? Because the two colors are very different things. Or are we talking about the name Silver Sky versus Silverburst? Not sure. Because both of these things, both of these claims, the Theodore claim and also the Silverburst claim, are for limited edition guitars that are no longer going to be made. Now, of course, PRS and Gibson could revive them and bring back more of the Nebula or more of the Theodore, but they probably won't. So in canceling these trademarks, it's not like PRS isn't going to be able to make McCarty's or Silver Skies, and it's not like Gibson isn't going to be able to make other Ted McCarty inspired models like the Les Paul or 335 or whatever. Of course they are. They're going to continue doing that. It's this very specific kind of fight, and this is where my opinion comes in. Now, the counterclaim from Gibson almost, to me, seems a little bit petty because, I mean, you're only going after a tiny sector of the Silver Sky, claiming that it's the Silverburst that conflicts with the, I don't know. It just seems a little bit like, okay, are we trying to retaliate in some way here? I don't know. Who knows? I mean, like I said at the beginning of the video, I love both of these companies. I mean, arguably PRS wouldn't exist without Gibson because of McCarty. And I mean, maybe they would, maybe they'd just be a different brand. Who knows? But I mean, they're both phenomenal guitar makers. They've made just iconic instruments. I have both. I'm sure you have both or have played both. There's just so many great things to say about both brands. And it's just, legal disputes happen. But what do you think about this? I mean, it's like I said, there's two different claims happening here. One splintered off from the original claim against the Theodore guitar. Again, the McCarty Estate claiming that Gibson does not have the right to use Ted McCarty's name. And the Theodore implies that McCarty and his estate endorsed that guitar. PRS is saying that Theodore being used on a Gibson guitar could confuse people with their McCarty model. And then we have the spin-off case of the Silver Sky Nebula, which apparently is too close to the Silverburst finish that existed on some Gibson guitars. Because again, we're talking about limited edition guitars that aren't being made anymore. So find it kind of interesting that this is happening. As I saw in the comments of my last video with the Gibson DiMarzio trademark dispute, a lot of you associate litigation with Gibson. So, does this help that kind of thought and feeling toward Gibson? Probably not. What do you think the outcome is going to be? We'll monitor it closely. And again, go read that guitar.com article because they do a really great job of breaking all this down so that we can all understand it.